The morning sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the county courthouse, slicing through the dust motes that hovered in the heavy air. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and nervous sweat. Court reporters tapped their pens anxiously. Stenographers' fingers danced across keyboards, and a low murmur of conversation buzzed through the room like electricity before a storm. No one had expected the courtroom to be full this early on a Thursday, yet somehow word had spread. Every seat was taken. Family members, neighbors, reporters, and a few curious strangers squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the drama about to unfold. At the center of it all, a small wooden chair rocked gently back and forth, holding a toddler who looked far too tiny for the chaos surrounding her. Mila's wide, dark eyes darted nervously around the room, her chubby hands clutching the edge of the chair for balance. She didn't understand what was happening, not really, but she felt it. The tension, the anger, the unspoken fear radiating off the adults like heat. Her tiny mouth quivered, and she sucked on her thumb, a fragile anchor to the world she knew, the one where her mother still smiled and bedtime stories were safe. At the front of the room, the judge, a stern man with silver streaks in his hair and deep lines etched into his forehead, banged the gavel. Bang, bang. "Order, everyone, please." The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing whispers, shuffling papers, and the scratching of pens. The room fell quiet, tense, expectant, and heavy with unspoken threats. Every eye was fixed on the tiny figure at the center of this storm. Two uniformed officers entered, their polished boots clicking against the marble floor. Between them walked a massive German shepherd named Ranger. His coat glimmered black and tan under the overhead lights, and his eyes were sharp, intelligent, like liquid amber that could see into the souls of the guilty. Ranger had been trained for years, a K-9 handler's perfect partner, obedient, fierce when necessary, and deeply protective. But today, something was different. The dog walked slowly, deliberately, like he knew this courtroom contained more than just human lies. Mila's aunt, a frazzled woman named Corinne, clutched her daughter's arm tightly. "Stay with me, sweetie," she whispered, but Mila's attention was already elsewhere. She squirmed in Corinne's arms, the urge to move bubbling up inside her. Her tiny feet patted the polished wooden floor as she stepped down from Corinne's grasp, her balance wobbly but determined. The adults gasped. No one had anticipated a toddler moving freely in a room full of tension. The judge's gavel struck again. "Bailiff, bring that child back immediately." His voice carried across the room, sharp as a whip, but Mila didn't stop. She toddled forward, one small hand reaching out instinctively. Ranger, the huge, trained K-9, paused, ears flicking as he tilted his head to watch the child. A hush fell over the courtroom. Reporters lowered their cameras, officers froze mid-step, and the stepfather, the man who had been the center of every whispered accusation for months, leaned back in his chair, blinking as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. The toddler reached Ranger and placed her tiny hand on his snout. She whispered 4 simple words. They were barely audible, yet somehow the room felt them, as if the words vibrated in the air itself. Everyone leaned in, straining to hear. And then Ranger did something no one had ever seen before. He lifted his head sharply and barked once. Not a casual bark, not a warning bark, a bark that felt like a jolt straight to the chest, a signal that something unseen had just revealed itself. The officers stiffened. Ranger never barked in court, never. He was trained to be calm, to ignore distractions, but he had barked now, at a toddler. Something about it sent shivers down spines. The stepfather's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. "Get that dog away from me," he hissed, voice low but shaking. He leaned back in his chair, one hand twitching nervously near his pocket. Ranger did not move. He simply stepped closer to the man, his growl low and vibrating through the floorboards, felt more than heard. It was an ancient sound, primal and unnerving, a warning carried from centuries of instinct. The room held its collective breath. Mila's tiny finger rose and pointed at the stepfather's jacket. Her voice, soft and trembling, repeated the words she had whispered moments before. Each syllable hung in the air, weighty and deliberate. Ranger's eyes locked on the man, unblinking, unrelenting. The dog's stance stiffened, muscles coiling like springs. The stepfather's hand twitched again. Metallic clattered from his pocket, a small, silver key fell to the floor, skittering across the polished tiles like a stone skipping across a lake. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silent courtroom. Reporters gasped. The judge's gavel wavered midair as he tried to regain order. The prosecutor, a tall man with a permanent frown and a habit of packing, bent down to pick up the key. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling, this could be evidence." The stepfather's face was pale, sweat beaded on his forehead. It's nothing, just my truck key." His voice cracked on the last word. Ranger sat down beside the key, eyes never leaving the man. A growl rumbled in his chest again, deep, resonant, like thunder rolling across a distant field. The courtroom was silent except for the tiny creak of Mila's chair as she shifted her weight, her gaze locked on the stepfather. Karen, Mila's aunt, pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears shimmered in her eyes. She's not even talking in full sentences yet," she whispered, voice quivering. How does she know?" No one had an answer. Not yet. But everyone felt it. The air was electric, charged with anticipation and dread. Something was about to unravel, something that had been hidden carefully, cruelly for months. And this toddler and this dog were at the center of it. The judge leaned forward, fingers gripping the edge of his bench. "Deputies, check the vehicle immediately. I want every inch searched," he commanded, his voice barely hiding the tremor that ran through it. As officers hurried out of the courtroom, Mila reached for Ranger, her tiny hand resting against his side. She whispered again, a different phrase this time, small and trembling. Ranger whined softly, pressing his massive head against her shoulder, as if he understood the weight of her words. And then one officer returned, panting, face white as chalk. "Your Honor," he said, voice breaking, "you need to see this." The room held its collective breath, hearts hammering, as everyone waited for the next revelation, the truth that would shatter everything. The toddler and the K9 had already spoken. Now, the adults would have to listen. The tension in the courtroom was so thick it felt as though it could suffocate anyone who dared breathe too loudly. And at the center of it all, Mila and Ranger waited, innocent, instinctual, and terrifyingly precise. The key had fallen, the dog had barked, the child had spoken. And the silence that followed screamed louder than any voice ever could. The courtroom had gone completely silent. The metallic click of the silver key hitting the polished floor echoed in the minds of everyone present like a bell tolling a warning. Even the gavel had been forgotten, lying useless in the judge's hand. Reporters froze mid-breath, cameras dangling from their hands, as if capturing this moment might somehow shatter reality itself. Mila stood beside Ranger, tiny hands still pressed against his fur. Her eyes were wide, shining with something older than her years, an instinctive knowledge, a truth she didn't yet have words for. Ranger's body was rigid, muscles taut, tail stiff against the floor. His ears twitched like radar dishes. He had never acted like this in a courtroom before, not in 100 hearings, not even when aggressive suspects tried to push him away. The stepfather leaned back in his chair, beads of sweat forming along his temple, hand hovering near the pocket where the key had fallen. "That dog, he's trained," he muttered, trying to force a shaky laugh. "He doesn't know what he's—" His words froze as Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, reverberating up the legs of everyone in the room. Ranger stepped closer. One massive paw lifted, then another. His eyes locked onto the man with an intensity that seemed almost human, almost accusatory. It was as if Ranger could see the thoughts in the stepfather's head, the lies he'd spent months weaving, the secrets he'd buried in shadows. The child's voice, small but unwavering, cut through the tension. "Truck, Mommy's watch." No one moved. The officers near the bench exchanged uneasy glances. Ranger's growl shifted into a low, warning rumble. His hackles rose. The child's tiny words, almost indecipherable to anyone else, were enough to trigger a response in the dog that no one could explain. The stepfather's eyes darted to Ranger, panic finally cracking the mask of control he'd worn for months. "Get that dog away from me," he barked, louder this time. He leaned back so sharply that his chair tipped onto its side, clattering against the floor, wood splintering under the sudden weight. The entire courtroom jumped. Gasps filled the space, but Ranger did not flinch. He did not retreat. He planted himself firmly, a massive wall between Mila and the man who had, for reasons no one yet understood, drawn the dog's attention. Then, as if the universe were conspiring to make the impossible happen, something metallic slid across the floor. A small, silver key, bouncing and spinning, until it came to a rest at Ranger's paws. The prosecutor, pale and trembling, bent down and picked it up with gloved hands. "Your Honor," he said, voice tight, this isn't just a key. It looks like a lockbox key. It could be evidence." The stepfather's face turned ghostly white. His jaw trembled, lips parting and closing like a fish out of water. "No, that's not nothing, just my truck key," he stammered. His fingers twitched nervously. "It's just for my truck." Ranger growled again, deep and low, vibrating through the soles of shoes, the wooden floor, even the walls. The dog sat down next to the key, refusing to move, his gaze never leaving the man. The entire courtroom held its breath. Mila's small hand rested on Ranger's neck. She leaned forward, barely whispering, her voice quivering. "Help, Mommy." Corinne, the toddler's aunt, gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes. She's not even forming full sentences yet," she whispered. "And she's saying things about her mother." The judge, a man usually unshakable in his wooden seat, leaned forward, his face pale, hand gripping the edge of the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. "Deputies, check the vehicle immediately. I want a full search. Every inch." The officers nodded, springing into action. Their polished boots clacked against the floor as they hustled out of the room, two of them carrying a metal detector and another with a flashlight. The tension in the air thickened, like a storm cloud about to burst. Everyone in the courtroom instinctively leaned forward, eyes glued to the small drama unfolding between toddler and dog, unable to pull away from what was clearly about to change everything. Mila's small fingers twitched as she whispered another phrase, her voice trembling. "Key, Daddy, hide." Ranger's ears pricked. The dog whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose, a gesture both comforting and alerting. Everyone watched, hearts hammering. This toddler, barely able to speak, was somehow guiding a trained K-9 to uncover secrets no adult had managed to reveal. Out in the hallway, officers loaded the stepfather's truck with equipment. Flashlights scanned the dark interior. The metallic scent of a lockbox inside the glove compartment caught the attention of one of the deputies. He reached in carefully and pulled it out. Small, black, unassuming, but heavy with the promise of hidden truths. The deputy held it aloft and spoke into his radio, voice tight. "We found it. Lockbox," handing over to the prosecutor for processing. Back in the courtroom, Ranger shifted his weight, his eyes never leaving the stepfather. Every muscle in the dog's body tensed. Mila leaned against his side, tiny face scrunched with concentration, murmuring words only she and Ranger seemed to understand. The stepfather's hands twitched again toward the pocket where he had once held the key. Then the impossible happened. Ranger lunged, not violently but with precision, a single fluid motion, his massive frame blocking the stepfather entirely. The man recoiled in shock, chair skidding backward. He nearly fell, catching himself at the edge of the table. The courtroom gasped collectively. Something had shifted. It wasn't just a key, not just a dog, not just a toddler's words. Everyone felt it. The air was heavier now, charged with fear and anticipation. Something hidden for months, maybe years, was on the verge of being exposed. The judge slammed the gavel, though it barely made a sound over the tension. Everyone remained calm, he said, voice trembling. "No one leaves until we understand exactly what's happening." Reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras snapping quietly, trying to capture the tension, the fear, the small miracle happening before their eyes. The stepfather's lips moved silently, muttering under his breath, as he realized his carefully curated world of lies and control was unraveling in a courtroom no bigger than the life he had tried to dominate. Mila's tiny hand lifted again, pointing at the stepfather. Ranger followed her gesture with his eyes, ears pricked. The connection between toddler and dog was undeniable, unbreakable, a silent language of instinct, fear, and courage that no human could decode. The prosecutor bent down to Ranger and whispered something in his ear. The dog responded with a single, low bark, vibrating like a drum roll across the courtroom floor. Every adult froze. The judge exhaled, trying to steady himself, but even he could not hide the tension in his shoulders. He leaned forward, peering down over his spectacles at the small child and her canine guardian. This is extraordinary," he said. "I've never seen anything like this in my career." And yet, even as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, a deeper sense of unease settled over everyone. Something was coming next, something larger than anyone could anticipate. Mila leaned closer to Ranger, whispering one final word, "See." The dog's eyes shot toward the courtroom door. His body stiffened, ears forward, growl rising low and warning. Everyone turned their heads slowly, instinctively, as if drawn by some invisible tether. At the back of the courtroom, a shadow moved. Just a flicker at first, almost unnoticeable. But Ranger's hackles rose, and Mila's tiny hand tightened on his fur. The stepfather's eyes widened in sudden terror. The air in the courtroom seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Something important, hidden, undeniable, was about to be revealed. And no one in that room, from the stern judge to the reporters to the spectators, would ever forget the moment Ranger turned his gaze toward that shadow. The impossible reaction had begun. The deputies returned, their boots echoing against the polished floor, carrying something heavy and black in their hands. The room, already taut with tension, seemed to hum as if the very walls held their collective breath. Every pair of eyes followed the deputies as they approached the front, their hands trembling slightly. Even the most hardened reporters and courtroom veterans felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on them like a physical force. The black object they carried was small but dense, a lockbox, nondescript in appearance but ominous in presence. Its surface reflected the overhead lights, revealing faint scratches and fingerprints, evidence of its secretive past. Ranger remained close to Mila, his massive frame a living shield. The toddler clung to his fur, tiny fingers trembling. She didn't cry, but her eyes darted nervously, wide with the kind of fear only a child who has seen shadows behind closed doors can understand. The prosecutor, already pale from the earlier discoveries, took a deep breath and approached the judge. "Your Honor," he said, voice tight with urgency, "we need to examine this evidence immediately. It could change everything." The judge, who had spent decades presiding over hearings of every conceivable crime, leaned forward, his hands gripping the edges of the bench. His knuckles were white, and his normally steady eyes flickered with unease. "Open it," he commanded, though his voice carried a tremor, betraying the gravity of what was about to unfold. One of the deputies set the lockbox carefully on the table. A small click echoed as he inserted the silver key Mila had pointed out. The lid swung open slowly, revealing its contents: photos, receipts, notes, and a small memory card, each item meticulously arranged as if the stepfather had taken care to document something he never wanted anyone to find. The prosecutor picked up the first photograph. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it to the light. It showed Mila's room, taken from an angle that suggested stealth, almost predatory observation. There were toys scattered across the floor, a small bed in the corner, but then a shadow moved across the frame. It wasn't a shadow cast by the sunlight or a lamp. It was the dark, looming shape of an adult figure standing silently in the doorway. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as everyone leaned forward. The stepfather's face blanched, his lips pressing into a thin line. For months he had acted confident in control, as though he could manipulate every outcome. But now, with evidence in plain sight, even the bravest facade faltered. "Photos," the prosecutor whispered, lifting another. This one was more disturbing. It showed Mila sitting on the living room floor, playing quietly, unaware of the camera's presence. But the notes on the back, handwritten, hurried, almost frantic, detailed times, movements, and behaviors, documenting the child's routine as if preparing for something sinister. Mila's Aunt Corinne stifled a sob, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. How could he?" Her voice broke, disbelief washing over her like a tidal wave. The memory card was next. The prosecutor held it gingerly as though it were a live grenade. "Your Honor, this contains video footage from inside the house." The judge's brow furrowed, and he nodded for the card to be examined. A deputy connected it to a small laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying shaky, dimly lit footage of a living room. Shadows danced across the walls as the camera's lens struggled with poor lighting. Then came the first recognizable sound, Mila's cry. The toddler's wails pierced the air, small but sharp, echoing through the courtroom in a way that seemed to bring the horrors of the footage into the present. The figure of the stepfather appeared on the screen. He moved with controlled anger, a tense body and clenched fists. His voice, captured in chilling clarity, snapped, "Stop crying before someone hears you." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. No one breathed. No one moved. The sound of Mila's tiny voice, recorded, trapped, and replayed like evidence of an unspeakable reality, anchored everyone in disbelief. And then at the very end of the clip, the camera panned slightly, catching something that made every adult in the room swallow hard. A second shadow, faint but unmistakable, moved across the room. It lingered near a window, still and deliberate, as though aware of the camera. The timestamp confirmed it had occurred at night, matching neighbors' vague reports of strange sounds and flickering lights. The stepfather's eyes widened, his hands trembling. That's not, I do," his voice faltered, the practiced composure he had cultivated over months of lies unraveling like fragile string. The prosecutor, eyes dark with intensity, leaned forward. "Your Honor, that shadow, we think we know who it is." The judge's hand hovered over the gavel. He swallowed hard, fighting to maintain control over a courtroom now teetering on the edge of chaos. "Who?" The deputy hesitated, glance flicking nervously toward the stepfather. Someone we thought was gone." Gasps erupted like thunder. Corinne clutched Mila tightly, rocking her gently, whispering, "No, it can't be." The toddler, oblivious to the full weight of her words, tugged at Ranger's fur. Her voice, small and innocent, whispered again, "Mommy." Ranger's massive head lifted, ears pricked forward. His eyes locked onto the back of the courtroom, following some invisible signal only he seemed to perceive. The air in the room thickened, heavy with dread, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath. The judge leaned back, trying to regain control, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his fear. "Have we verified, confirmed?" he asked, voice low but urgent. "Yes, Your Honor," the deputy said, voice tight. "The woman in the video, the second shadow, was reported missing nearly a year ago. Officially, she was never found, and now here she is." A hush fell over the courtroom. Time seemed to stop. Every pair of eyes scanned the back of the room, and then the doors creaked open. The woman entered slowly, her movements tentative, fragile, like a bird returning after a storm. Her hair was disheveled, eyes wide and haunted. She wore clothing that suggested she had been living on the edge, but she was unmistakably alive. The stepfather's face went pale, lips parting and closing as he stammered, unable to form coherent words. Rage, fear, and disbelief warred across his features. For the first time, he was caught completely off guard, stripped of his usual control. Mila's small voice cut through the stunned silence. "Mama." The woman's eyes locked on her daughter. She fell to her knees, arms trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Mila, my baby." Her voice was a fragile whisper, carrying a mixture of relief and sorrow so raw it made the entire room shiver. Ranger stepped closer to Mila, positioning himself protectively between her and the stepfather. His low growl reminded everyone of the danger still lurking. The toddler reached out, tiny arms wrapping around her mother's neck, clinging to the first real safety she had known in months. Karen pressed her hands together, sobbing openly now, relief and fear crashing over her like a tidal wave. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, though the images on their cameras could never capture the intensity of what was happening. The stepfather stood frozen, his hands shaking. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His carefully constructed world of lies, of manipulation and control, had collapsed in the presence of a toddler's instinct, a dog's perception, and the return of the woman he had hidden from the world. The prosecutor stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Your Honor, given the evidence, the video, and the discovery of the lockbox, the stepfather must be held immediately for questioning and detention. Charges will include kidnapping and endangerment." The judge nodded, still trying to steady his breathing. "Deputies, take him into custody." Ranger's gaze never left the man, growling softly, warning of consequences far beyond legal ones. Mila rested her head on her mother's shoulder, shivering but safe, while the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. But even in this moment of reunion, tension lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. His eyes scanned the courtroom with precision, as if sensing that this was far from over. The doors at the back of the room, where the shadow had first appeared in the video, shifted slightly. Ranger stiffened. Mila's mother, though holding her daughter tightly, sensed the same unease. Something remained hidden, something the courtroom had not yet uncovered. And as the stepfather was escorted out, handcuffed and defeated, Ranger barked once more, not at the man, but at the space beyond, his growl vibrating deep in every chest present. The courtroom held its collective breath again. Whatever was coming next, everyone knew, the story was far from finished. The impossible, the hidden truth, had only begun to reveal itself. The courtroom had become a storm of disbelief, fear, and relief. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Cameras clicked silently, capturing images that no one in that room would ever forget. Mila clung to her mother, small hands pressing against her mom's chest, trembling from the adrenaline of reunion. Ranger remained steadfast, body coiled and alert, ears perked toward the back of the room where shadows seemed to linger even in the harsh light. The black lockbox sat on the judge's bench, now the center of everyone's attention. What it contained had already begun to unravel the truth, enough to shock, to terrify, and to confirm suspicions. But the prosecutor still had more to reveal. He carefully lifted the memory card from the box and held it high for the judge to see. "Your Honor, the footage on this card is worse than anyone imagined," he said, voice tight. "It confirms abuse, manipulation, and deception. But there's something else." The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. His face, pale from the morning's tension, now showed traces of disbelief and fear. "Something else?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "Explain." The prosecutor nodded, lowering his voice to a tense whisper, though the entire room seemed to strain to catch every word. "The lockbox contains receipts, notes, and photos that don't just show the stepfather's actions. They point to someone else being involved. Someone who had access to the house and to the child. Someone we thought we had lost, and perhaps should have never assumed gone." A hush fell over the room, thick and suffocating. Every head turned instinctively toward the back, where the doors had opened earlier to reveal Mila's mother alive but fragile. Ranger shifted slightly, moving closer to Mila as if anticipating the next wave of revelation. The toddler, sensing the tension, hugged her mother tighter. Her small voice whispered into the dog's fur, barely audible, "Danger." The judge nodded slowly, signaling for the evidence to be brought closer. Deputies carefully opened the lockbox again. Inside were photos stacked in neat piles, some dated, some marked with cryptic notes. Receipts for unusual purchases, strange addresses, and hotel stays were carefully folded and labeled. Each item told a story of calculated movements, of secrecy, and of a plan that had been meticulously hidden. The prosecutor selected one photo and held it up for the court to see. It showed the stepfather standing in the hallway, but in the background, barely noticeable, was a second figure, partially obscured by shadows, their presence almost ghost-like. A chill ran through the courtroom. Even the most experienced officers shifted uncomfortably. "That figure," the prosecutor continued, "matches reports of a person who has been missing for over a year. Our records show no official sightings, no records, no sightings from neighbors. And yet here in the stepfather's own home, we find them documented, alive, present, and involved." Corinne gasped. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes darted nervously between the stepfather and the lockbox, disbelief battling with the dawning reality. "She was gone, missing, dead, we thought." The prosecutor nodded solemnly. "Officially, yes, but this evidence proves otherwise. The woman, the mother, is alive, and the stepfather was complicit in keeping her hidden, manipulating everyone's perceptions. This lockbox is a record of months, possibly years of his concealment." Ranger growled low, a sound that vibrated in the chest of everyone present. His gaze never wavered from the stepfather. Mila, small and vulnerable in her mother's arms, shivered but pressed closer to the dog's massive side. She didn't fully understand the implications, but instinctively she knew danger lingered nearby, and Ranger's protective presence was the only reassurance she had. The judge inhaled sharply. "So the lockbox confirms what we feared," he said, voice low but cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's not just evidence of neglect or abuse. It's evidence of a coordinated effort to deceive, manipulate, and conceal." "Correct." The prosecutor nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And there's more. The notes inside the lockbox indicate specific times, places, and interactions, dates and locations that tie the stepfather to additional crimes beyond what we initially suspected. The memory card contains video footage that further corroborates these notes, and the figures in the footage, the people, the interactions, match eyewitness accounts and reports we previously could not verify." The room went deadly quiet. The sheer weight of the revelation pressed down on everyone's shoulders. Reporters and spectators alike felt the intensity of the moment, as if the truth itself had physical form and threatened to crush the unsuspecting. Then came the most chilling part. The prosecutor inserted the memory card into a laptop and projected the footage onto the large screen at the front of the courtroom. The room went dark as the screen flickered to life. Dim lighting, shaky camera angles, and shadows moving across rooms. Every frame spoke of secrecy, fear, and tension. The stepfather's voice, sharp and commanding, echoed from the speakers. Mila's cries, faint but unmistakable, pierced the air. The officers leaned in, their faces pale. The images of the child, alone, distressed, and scared, made even the toughest courtroom veterans feel a pang of helplessness. And then, just as the video seemed unbearable, a second figure appeared in the background. The shadowy silhouette was almost imperceptible, but Ranger stiffened, ears pricked, and his growl rose. Everyone's eyes instinctively moved to the screen, straining to identify the figure. The prosecutor paused the video. "There," he said, voice low. "That is the person who has been missing, officially missing for over a year. This footage confirms their presence inside the house during multiple instances of documented abuse and manipulation. It's undeniable." A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Mila's mother, still holding her child, pressed her face into the toddler's shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh God," she whispered, I thought I would never see her again. That someone took her from me." The stepfather's hands trembled, his face contorted with anger and fear. That's not," he began, but no words could mask the unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. Rage, desperation, and panic flitted across his features in rapid succession. The judge leaned forward, voice commanding but strained with emotion. "Deputies, ensure the evidence is secured. The stepfather will be detained immediately. Charges will include kidnapping, concealment, and endangerment." Ranger moved slightly, positioning himself between Mila and the stepfather as the deputies approached. The dog's growl was low, warning, and unmistakable. Danger had not passed, and the threat was still very real. Mila, though small and trembling, pressed herself against Ranger's massive side. Her tiny voice, barely audible, whispered, "Safe." The dog nudged her hand gently, as if to say for now, "Yes, but be ready." The judge exhaled, trying to regain composure. This courtroom will need to process this evidence carefully, but make no mistake, the truth revealed by this lockbox is damning, and it is far from the end of the story. At that moment, Ranger's ears flicked toward the back of the courtroom. The dog stiffened, body taut like a bowstring. Even Mila's mother noticed the shift in his posture. Something unseen, something lurking beyond the threshold of the doors, had caught the K9's attention. The stepfather, escorted toward the exit, finally realized that his web of deception had collapsed entirely. But Ranger, sensing another layer of threat, refused to relax. He remained alert, unyielding, and unwavering. And then the courtroom collectively froze. Ranger's eyes, locked onto something invisible to the human eye, glimmered with understanding. The unseen presence in the room, an unspoken danger, a hidden truth, loomed closer. The lockbox had revealed what was hidden. But Ranger, Mila, and her mother all sensed that the story had only just begun. The tension in the room thickened, heavy with anticipation, as everyone waited. What the lockbox had uncovered was monumental, terrifying, and undeniable. But something else, something lurking in the shadows, was about to strike. And no one in that room would ever see it coming. The courtroom was still reeling from the revelations of the lockbox. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief, shock, and barely contained fury. Even seasoned officers and courtroom staff could feel the weight of the evidence pressing down on them. Ranger remained a sentinel at Mila's side, muscles coiled, ears flicked forward, eyes scanning every movement as though aware of threats that no human could see. Mila's mother, fragile yet resolute, held her daughter tightly, her face pale but determined. Her small fingers intertwined with the toddler, holding onto the only anchor that had survived the storm of lies and deceit. Every creak of the courtroom door, every shuffle of feet made her flinch, but she refused to release Mila from her embrace. The prosecutor, his usually precise demeanor fraying at the edges, turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, there is additional evidence," he said, his voice tense. "Something we did not anticipate, something that could change everything once again." The judge's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. "What is it?" His voice, calm but sharp, demanded clarity amidst the tension. The prosecutor held up a small external hard drive, black and unassuming in its casing. "This hard drive was hidden inside the lockbox," he explained. "We initially thought it contained copies of the same videos we already reviewed, but preliminary scanning shows something far more disturbing and far more revealing." A murmur ran through the courtroom, soft but undeniable. Reporters leaned forward, cameras ready. Even the stepfather, restrained and being escorted out, managed a glance at the evidence, his eyes widening in alarm. The prosecutor connected the drive to the laptop, projecting the contents onto the courtroom's large screen. The room darkened, the overhead lights dimmed, and the glow of the screen cast long shadows across every face. The first frames were ordinary, living room corners, bedrooms, toys scattered across the floor. But as the footage progressed, something changed. The camera angle shifted, capturing not just the stepfather's actions but something previously unnoticed. Interactions that suggested someone else had been orchestrating events from the shadows, subtly guiding his behavior. Then the most shocking moment appeared on the screen. Mila herself, the toddler now clinging to Ranger's side in real life, was captured on video pointing toward a specific corner of the house, months before anyone had imagined she could comprehend danger or lead. She looked small, fragile, yet deliberate, almost aware of the significance of her gesture. Ranger's ears twitched, and he stepped closer to Mila, his massive body shielding her as if anticipating a renewed threat. The toddler, sensing the dog's alertness, pressed herself against him and whispered, "Watch." The prosecutor paused the video. "Your Honor, the significance is not immediately obvious," he said, voice strained. "But notice where Mila is pointing." Every pair of eyes leaned in. The corner of the room appeared innocuous at first, just a chair, some toys, a bookshelf. But Ranger had already noticed it. The dog's gaze shifted sharply, muscles tensing as if he could smell the secret buried within. The prosecutor continued, "We investigated the location. What Mila is pointing to is a hidden compartment built into the wall behind that bookshelf. It was small, inconspicuous, and designed to conceal items and possibly people." The courtroom went silent. Every breath seemed amplified. Corinne, Mila's aunt, pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "No, it can't be," she whispered. Her mind raced with fear and disbelief. What could he have hidden there? The judge's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the bench. "Deputies," he said, voice low but commanding, "investigate immediately, carefully. Anything could be inside." Two officers approached the location in the video, carefully moving the bookshelf aside. Ranger's head followed their movements, eyes sharp, body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The toddler babbled softly, tugging at his fur, whispering tiny words no one else could hear. Then the officers found it, a small, concealed panel just large enough to hold items or a person of small stature. The metal latch had been tampered with slightly but was functional. One officer carefully pried it open. Inside, they discovered evidence that made every adult in the room gasp. Bundles of documents, small electronic devices, and personal items were neatly packed inside. Receipts, letters, and notes, all meticulously documented, laid bare a hidden operation. It wasn't just concealment. It was manipulation, coercion, and control executed with chilling precision. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Tucked behind some of the items, partially hidden by a folded blanket, was a small device, a camera, operational and blinking faintly with a red light. Ranger growled low, a warning that cut through the air like a knife. Mila's mother instinctively pressed her child closer, heart hammering in her chest. The prosecutor's voice trembled as he explained, "This camera appears to have been recording continuously, unbeknownst to anyone. And preliminary review suggests it may contain footage we did not expect." The room held its breath as the officer carefully removed the camera and connected it to the laptop. The first frames appeared on the screen, empty rooms, shadows, toys, and then a figure moving deliberately across the frame. It wasn't the stepfather. It was someone else, a person whose presence had been hidden until now. Someone controlling events, silently guiding actions, observing every interaction. And then, in the corner of the frame, the toddler appeared, pointing, whispering, interacting, not in play but with an awareness far beyond her age. The prosecutor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, this footage suggests that the stepfather may not have acted alone. There is another individual, someone who has orchestrated events from the shadows." Corinne pressed a hand to her mouth again. "Oh God, no, it can't be." Her eyes darted nervously toward the stepfather, who had been led to the holding area. Rage, panic, and disbelief flashed across his face, but he had no words. He was powerless now. Ranger growled again, low and warning. His massive body shifted, ears pricked, eyes locked on the direction of the courtroom doors. The dog's instincts had detected something, the presence of a hidden threat, or perhaps another secret waiting to emerge. Mila, small and trembling, whispered again, "See." Her tiny finger pointed toward the screen, toward the figure on the video. It was clear she recognized the significance. The child, barely able to speak full sentences, was guiding the adults to the truth. The judge leaned forward, voice tight. "Deputies, identify this individual, trace every frame. We need names, addresses, and connections immediately." The prosecutor nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, we're already working on it. But the implications, they are vast. This is no longer just a case of concealment and abuse. This is a coordinated, deliberate manipulation, and the person responsible has remained hidden until now." The courtroom remained frozen, eyes fixed on the screen, hearts hammering. Ranger's growl persisted, low and ominous. The toddler clung to his side, whispering words only the dog seemed to understand. "Danger, still here." A soft creak echoed through the room, the kind that made every head turn. Ranger stiffened instantly, ears pricked, muscles taut. The shadow at the back of the courtroom shifted, barely perceptible but unmistakable. The stepfather, handcuffed and escorted by deputies, froze mid-step. His eyes widened in sudden terror. "No, no, it's not, you ca," his voice cracked, desperation overtaking the bravado he had clung to for months. Ranger's growl deepened, resonating through the courtroom, warning of a threat unseen but undeniable. Mila's mother pressed her daughter closer, whispering protective words, though her own fear was palpable. And as the final frames of the mysterious video played, the truth became undeniable. The story was far from over. The hidden individual, someone who had manipulated, controlled, and concealed, was about to be revealed. The courtroom held its collective breath. Everyone knew, instinctively, that what came next would change everything. The video no one expected had surfaced. And with it, the danger lurking in the shadows had only just begun to move. The courtroom remained frozen, every breath held as if exhaling too soon might shatter the fragile balance between revelation and chaos. Ranger's growl rumbled low, a warning that vibrated through the floorboards and into the bones of everyone present. Mila clung to her mother, fingers digging into the fabric of her shirt as though holding on could shield her from the unseen threat lurking beyond the room. The prosecutor stepped closer to the judge, his voice tight but steady. "Your Honor, based on the video and corroborating evidence from the lockbox, we have identified the second individual. This person was in the home during multiple incidents, orchestrating events behind the scenes, and..." A sudden commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. The doors creaked open with a sharpness that seemed to slice the tension in two. Every head turned. Ranger stiffened instantly, muscles taut, his hackles rising as if he had smelled the storm before it arrived. Mila's small body pressed closer to her mother, her eyes wide, unblinking, sensing danger no one else could yet perceive. From the doorway stepped a figure, a woman in her mid-30s, unassuming at first glance, but her presence carried a subtle intensity that made the air in the room shift. Her hair was pulled back tightly, eyes sharp, scanning the courtroom with an almost predatory precision. She moved deliberately, each step measured, confident, yet there was an undercurrent of tension, a barely restrained storm of urgency and fear. The judge's gavel trembled in his hand. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice carrying authority and disbelief simultaneously. The woman stopped a few feet inside, her gaze finally resting on the stepfather, her lips pressed into a thin line, voice steady but sharp. "I'm someone he thought would never be found," she said, each word measured, "and I know everything he's done." Gasps ran through the courtroom. Mila's mother's eyes widened in recognition and shock. She whispered, almost inaudibly, It can't be." The prosecutor stepped forward, urgency crackling in his voice. "Ma'am, please state your name and your connection to this case." The woman took a slow, deliberate breath. "My name is Elena Morris. I was the stepfather's accomplice, or rather, someone he thought he could manipulate." Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Ranger and Mila, until this little girl and her dog started unraveling his lies. A shiver ran through the courtroom. The stepfather's face went pale, lips parting and closing as he struggled to maintain his composure. Rage and fear flitted across his features, but now his carefully constructed world was cracking before him. Corinne pressed her hand to her mouth, her voice barely audible. "Oh God, it's her. I knew something wasn't right." Elena's eyes locked onto the stepfather. "You thought no one would ever find the lockbox. You thought your carefully hidden videos, receipts, and notes were safe. But you underestimated Mila, and you underestimated Ranger." Ranger growled, the sound low and menacing, as if to confirm Elena's words. Mila whispered almost in awe, "Dogs see danger." The stepfather's hands trembled. "Elena, no, you can't. You're lying." His voice cracked mid-sentence, the bravado that had shielded him for months dissolving under the weight of exposure. Elena shook her head slowly. "I'm not lying. Every photo, every receipt, every video, it's all true, and now it's all here." She gestured toward the lockbox on the judge's bench. "Everything you tried to hide, everything you thought no one would ever discover, is now evidence in this courtroom." The prosecutor nodded, his eyes dark with intensity. "Your Honor, given Elena's testimony, the footage, and the physical evidence from the lockbox and the hidden camera, we now have enough to not only confirm the stepfather's crimes, but also establish a pattern of coordinated manipulation and concealment that involved Elena's knowledge and eventual cooperation in concealing the truth." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowed, hands gripping the bench. "Ms. Morris," he said, voice measured but tense, "you are admitting involvement in concealment, yet you have come forward voluntarily. Explain your role clearly." Elena's lips pressed together. "I was initially coerced, manipulated by him. He threatened me, isolated me, made me complicit in actions I should never have participated in. I know that doesn't excuse my involvement, but I came forward because Mila led us here. This child, her intuition, and her bond with Ranger exposed the truth that he thought would remain hidden forever." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The juxtaposition of innocence and cunning, the toddler's instincts guiding the unmasking of adults' deceit, was almost too surreal to comprehend. Corinne's voice trembled as she whispered, "All this time, she was the missing piece." Elena nodded, eyes filled with regret and resolve. The lockbox contained every trace of his deception, but he never anticipated a toddler's courage and a dog's instinct. They forced the truth into the light. The stepfather's eyes darted nervously between Elena and the lockbox, then toward Mila and Ranger. You can't. None of this, it's not real, it's fabricated." Ranger growled louder, a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a warning shot. The dog's massive frame shifted slightly, body coiled, ears flicked toward the stepfather as if declaring unequivocally, any false move, any hint of further deception would not go unanswered. Mila, small and trembling, whispered once again, pointing toward Ranger and then the stepfather, "No, danger, bad." Her tiny voice carried a weight far beyond her years, commanding attention and instilling fear in the man who had tried to control her world. The judge's voice cut through the tension, sharp and unwavering. "Deputies, ensure the stepfather remains detained." His actions, combined with Elena's testimony and the physical evidence, constitute a clear case of kidnapping, concealment, and endangerment. Further charges may be added as investigation continues. The stepfather's composure completely unraveled. His breathing grew rapid, words tumbled from his mouth in a frantic attempt to justify, to escape, to deny. But every denial fell flat in the courtroom, heavy with truth. Alina, meanwhile, continued, her voice calm but intense. "I know I cannot undo what I helped him do, but by coming forward, by telling the truth now, I can help ensure he never manipulates or harms anyone else again. This child's courage and Ranger's loyalty, they forced my hand, and now the full extent of his crimes will be exposed." The courtroom seemed to collectively exhale, though the tension lingered like a storm cloud. Ranger never relaxed. His eyes remained fixed on the stepfather, sensing a threat beyond what any human could see. Mila's mother held her daughter tighter, her own body trembling with relief, fear, and anticipation of what might come next. Karen's voice was barely audible, choked with tears. It's over, isn't it? He can't hurt anyone now, right?" The judge shook his head slowly. "The legal process will take its course, but make no mistake, the shadow revealed here today changes everything. What has been exposed is only the beginning of a thorough investigation. There may be more hidden evidence, more actions to uncover, more truths yet unknown." Ranger growled low, a sound that reverberated through the room. Even now, amidst the revelations and the unraveling of decades of lies, he sensed that the danger was not fully gone. Mila's tiny hand brushed against his fur, seeking reassurance. The dog nudged her gently, a silent promise of protection and vigilance. The stepfather, restrained and pale, sat in stunned silence as Alina stepped back, hands raised slightly in surrender but eyes firm with resolve. "This is the truth," she said. "The hidden shadow is finally exposed, and now justice can begin." And as the courtroom absorbed the full weight of the revelation, a subtle shift occurred. Ranger's gaze flicked toward the back once more. Something still lingered in the shadows, unseen, unknown, but undeniably present. The shadow had been revealed, but the story was far from over. The courtroom had only just begun to exhale from the whirlwind of revelations when a sharp, metallic click echoed from the far side of the room. Ranger's body went rigid, ears swiveling toward the sound, muscles coiled like a spring. Mila's small hand gripped her mother's shirt, her tiny fingers trembling. "Danger now," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet loaded with a gravity that forced everyone in the room to pause. Karen's eyes widened. "What now?" she whispered, panic creeping into her tone. Her gaze darted between the stepfather, Alina, and Ranger, who had moved slightly in front of Mila, his massive frame a living shield. The judge, momentarily stunned, slammed his gavel to regain control. "Everyone remain calm. Deputies, identify the source of that sound immediately." But before anyone could move, the courtroom lights flickered and dimmed for a moment, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. A hush fell over the crowd. The metallic click repeated, this time followed by a soft hiss, almost like air escaping a cylinder. Ranger's growl rose, deep and primal, vibrating through the floorboards. His eyes locked on the courtroom entrance, tracking movements invisible to everyone else. Mila, sensing the escalation, whispered again, "Bad coming now." The stepfather, restrained and flustered, tried to speak, but his words were frantic and incomprehensible. It's not. You don't understand." He swiveled his head toward Alina, as if hoping she could intervene. Alina's face hardened. "I've seen him plan every lie, every manipulation," she said quietly but firmly. "And I know he's capable of more, but he's not the immediate threat. There's someone else, someone he never expected to be challenged." The metallic hiss intensified, accompanied by a faint buzzing. Officers immediately moved toward the back doors, flashlights sweeping the shadows, but the source remained elusive. The spectators shifted nervously in their seats, cameras recording, phones pointed, documenting every tense second. And then it happened. A sudden explosion of sound, glass shattering in a back room. Papers flew into the air, a filing cabinet tipped over, sending metal clanging across the floor. Gasps and screams filled the courtroom as panic erupted. Ranger barked, a single, sharp bark that cut through the chaos like a command. He lunged forward, placing himself squarely between Mila and the threat, muscles rippling, teeth bared. The toddler pressed against his side, trusting the massive dog's instinct over her own understanding of danger. Mila's mother screamed, "Mila, stay with him." Her voice cracked with fear, but the dog's unwavering stance gave her a small sliver of hope. The deputies moved swiftly toward the disturbance, but it was Alina who noticed the subtle clues first. Shadows flitting just beyond the broken glass, a faint movement that suggested a person had slipped in unnoticed. Her voice rose, tense and commanding. "Stop! That's exactly what he counted on. Don't approach directly. He's armed and desperate." The stepfather's eyes went wide, realizing that whatever plan he had concocted or someone else had executed was now in motion. His bravado shattered entirely. "No, no, don't," he stammered, voice cracking. In the chaos, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in dark clothing, face partially concealed. His movements were quick, precise, calculated. He carried something in his hands, glinting under the flickering lights, a weapon, small but lethal. He had anticipated the exposure of his accomplice and had returned to ensure control. Ranger growled louder, the sound vibrating in everyone's chest. The man froze, momentarily startled by the dog's intimidating stance. Mila's tiny hand brushed the fur at his side, her instinct telling her that Ranger would protect her, that he was the barrier between innocence and danger. The judge's voice rang out, authoritative but trembling. "Deputies, contain the threat immediately. No one approaches until it's neutralized." But the intruder was fast, darting behind overturned furniture, using the chaos as cover. Officers shouted commands, trying to anticipate his movements, but he was practiced, too practiced. Every shadow he disappeared into, every step he took, was calculated to confuse and intimidate. Alina's eyes narrowed. She recognized the patterns immediately. "He's the one who trained him, the real shadow behind the stepfather," she shouted. "He's been orchestrating this from the start. That's why Mila's instincts led us here." Karen's breath caught. "You mean the stepfather wasn't acting alone this entire time?" Alina shook her head. "He was never the master of the situation. The stepfather was a pawn. This man, he's the real threat." The intruder's movements became bolder. He flicked a small device in his hand, and suddenly a haze of smoke filled one corner of the courtroom. Officers coughed and spluttered, temporary disorientation spreading like wildfire. Ranger leapt into action, powerful muscles propelling him through the smoke. He pinned the man's arm mid-motion, teeth snapping near but controlled, alerting the intruder that any sudden movement could be catastrophic. Mila clutched Ranger's side, her small body shaking but safe in the shadow of his protective form. The man struggled, but Ranger's training, instinct, and sheer force held him at bay. Officers converged, restraining him, while the intruder's weapon clattered to the floor, far out of reach. Mila's mother hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming. It's over," she whispered, though her voice trembled with residual fear. Alina exhaled, tension leaving her body as she surveyed the restrained intruder. "Not completely," she said, her voice sharp. "This man, he's the true mastermind. Everything the stepfather did, everything he tried to hide was under this man's control. But now he's caught. Ranger, Mila, you've just saved everyone in this room." Ranger lowered his stance slightly, still alert, still ready to act if needed. Mila pressed her face against his massive side, whispering a small, triumphant and relieved, "Good dog." The judge finally regained composure, though his hands shook. This courtroom has witnessed events beyond belief. The primary threat has been restrained, thanks to the actions of law enforcement, Ms. Morris' testimony, and remarkably, a child and her K-9 companion. But ensure, deputies, that no further threats remain. This case is far from over. Karen, tears streaming down her face, hugged Mila's mother. "I can't believe that little girl, she saw what no adult did, felt what no adult sensed in Ranger. He saved her life." Mila, still trembling but safe, whispered softly, Dog smart brave. She reached out to stroke Ranger's fur, a tiny smile breaking through her fear. The stepfather, still restrained and shaking, finally understood the depth of his defeat. Alina turned toward him, cold and unflinching. This isn't just about you anymore. You were a pawn, but you're accountable. Justice doesn't care for excuses. And Ranger, standing proudly beside the toddler, watched the restrained intruder with unwavering focus. His instincts told him that, although the immediate danger was neutralized, the story was not yet complete. He sensed threads still hidden, pieces of the puzzle that only time and courage would reveal. The courtroom, exhausted, shaken, and forever changed, slowly began to process the events of the past hour. A toddler's intuition, a K-9's instincts, and the revelations of hidden shadows had exposed a web of deceit, manipulation, and danger that no one had fully comprehended until now. And as everyone in the room glanced at one another, silent but understood, one fact remained undeniable. The hidden threat had struck, chaos had erupted, and the courage of the smallest among them had prevented tragedy. Yet the story was far from over. Even as the intruder was taken away, Ranger's eyes flicked toward the shadows at the back of the room, muscles taut, alert, vigilant. There were still questions unanswered, truths hidden, and dangers lurking beyond what anyone could see. The tension in the room remained electric. Justice had been partially served, but the aftermath, the reckoning that would follow, was only beginning. And Mila, nestled against her loyal K-9, whispered softly into his fur, "No more right." Ranger nudged her gently, eyes scanning the room, silently promising, "Not today, but always I'll be ready." Courtroom, still reverberating from the chaos of the intruder's attack, slowly began to settle. Officers secured the remaining evidence, carefully cataloging every item from the lockbox, the hidden camera, and the intruder's belongings. Each file, receipt, and photograph told a story of manipulation, coercion, and fear. The weight of months, years, of hidden crimes hung in the air like a storm cloud refusing to disperse. Mila, small and trembling, stayed pressed against Ranger's massive side. The dog's steady presence offered the only comfort she truly understood. Her mother held her close, tears streaking her face, but a glimmer of relief flickered in her eyes. Justice, at least for now, had a foothold. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze sweeping over the room. "We have witnessed extraordinary events today," he said, voice steady but tinged with gravity. "The combination of physical evidence, video documentation, and testimony has exposed crimes beyond what anyone imagined. But it is only through courage, the courage of a child, a mother, a K-9, and those willing to speak the truth, that we have arrived at this point." Alina stood nearby, exhausted but resolute. Her role in this ordeal had been revealed fully, complicit in secrecy, yet instrumental in exposing the truth. Her eyes flicked to the stepfather, who remained restrained, his face pale, a mixture of rage, fear, and disbelief etched into every feature. The prosecutor took a deep breath, glancing at the judge before addressing the courtroom. "Your Honor, given the evidence presented, the stepfather will face charges including child endangerment, concealment, manipulation, and obstruction of justice. The intruder, identified through surveillance, digital records, and physical evidence, will face additional charges: conspiracy, kidnapping, and premeditated assault. Both will be held accountable in full." Karen, sitting in the gallery, exhaled shakily. "It's finally over," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, her eyes flicked to Ranger and Mila. She knew instinctively that while the immediate danger had been addressed, the psychological echoes of the events would linger. Mila's mother pressed her daughter close. "You were so brave," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You and Ranger, you saved everyone." She stroked Ranger's fur, murmuring gratitude and relief in equal measure. Mila babbled in response, pointing again to the dog, her tiny face breaking into a small smile. "Good dog, brave." The judge continued, now turning his attention to Alina. "Ms. Morris, your testimony was critical. While your prior involvement complicates matters, your courage in coming forward has made a significant difference. Your cooperation will be noted in all proceedings, and you will be evaluated for potential leniency, given the circumstances and the risk you took to reveal the truth." Alina nodded, a mixture of relief and sorrow crossing her features. "I did what I had to do," she said quietly. "For Mila, for every child he could have harmed, for the truth." Her eyes, tired yet unwavering, scanned the room. Ranger's gaze met hers briefly, as if acknowledging her role in this chaotic, terrifying, and ultimately redemptive process. The stepfather, finally realizing the full scope of his defeat, slumped slightly in his chair, his face twisted with desperation. You don't understand," he muttered, voice trembling. "Everything I did to protect I." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Your excuses are irrelevant. The law does not weigh intentions alone, it weighs actions. And your actions have endangered a child, destroyed trust, and threatened the lives of those around you. Justice will now proceed without interference." Ranger remained alert, sensing that even in this moment of apparent resolution, vigilance was necessary. His ears twitched at the faint sounds of movement near the courthouse doors, the rustle of papers, the shuffle of feet. He had saved Mila once. An instinct told him there could always be another danger lurking, subtle but real. Mila, sensing the tension, buried her face into his side. "Safe now," she whispered. Ranger nudged her gently, reassuring her that for now, the immediate threat had passed. Her mother kissed the top of her head, holding her close, whispering words of love and protection. The courtroom slowly cleared as the evidence was secured, the intruder removed, and deputies maintained vigilance around the restrained stepfather. But outside, reporters buzzed with excitement, capturing the story in real time. Cameras flashed, capturing the heroic bond between Toddler and K9, the brave confession of Alina, and the unmasking of manipulation that had spanned months. As the last of the spectators filed out, Ranger's eyes scanned the room one final time. He approached the lockbox, sniffing at the evidence with careful deliberation. His instincts were precise. Every item contained a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of danger, a clue to the human deception he had helped unravel. Mila's mother approached Ranger, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You protected my child. You saw what no one else could." Ranger's tail swished gently in response, his massive head lowering as if acknowledging her gratitude. Mila reached up to stroke his fur again, tiny fingers brushing against his ear. Alina lingered near the bench, watching the scene unfold. She had faced fear and manipulation herself, yet seeing the bond between child and dog, the instinctive courage that had guided the investigation, left her with a profound sense of hope. "The truth," she whispered, almost to herself, "can be found in the most unlikely places." Karen, now composing herself, looked at the trio, Mila, her mother, and Ranger. "This story, it's unbelievable, but it's real, and it's going to change how people see courage, instinct, and loyalty." The stepfather, escorted from the courtroom, glared back once, eyes full of defiance, but his gaze fell upon Mila and Ranger. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of defeat, of exposure, of inevitable accountability. Outside the courthouse, sunlight glinted off the polished steps. Reporters crowded the entrance, eager to capture statements, photos, and interviews. But within the building, the air was heavy with relief, lingering tension, and the knowledge that, though the immediate threat had been neutralized, the reverberations of these events would continue to unfold for months, perhaps years. Ranger nudged Mila's hand gently, guiding her forward. Her mother followed, holding her child close, and Alina walked behind them, a quiet but unwavering presence. Together, they moved toward the doors, stepping into the sunlight and the promise of a future reclaimed from shadows. As the courthouse doors opened, a gust of wind swept through, scattering papers, stirring the hair of those present. Ranger paused, ears flicking, senses still attuned to every subtle shift. He had protected Mila, saved lives, and unmasked deception, but instinctively he knew vigilance was eternal. Mila looked up at him, eyes wide, full of trust and awe. "Good dog," she whispered again. Ranger nudged her, a silent promise of protection that extended beyond the immediate danger, beyond the courtroom, beyond the known world. Elena watched the scene, the bond between child and dog, mother and daughter, and finally allowed herself a small, weary smile. She had faced shadows herself, but in doing so had helped expose a truth so profound that even the darkest deceptions could not survive. Karen turned to her sister, voice trembling with emotion. "We're safe now, really safe." Her eyes glanced toward Ranger, then Mila, then Elena. "But we'll never forget how close it came, never forget who saved us." The judge, remaining behind, signed the final documentation, a quiet nod to the conclusion of one chapter. But in his mind, he knew that justice, though partially served today, was a process. The stepfather and the intruder would face full accountability, but the echoes of their manipulation would ripple through lives forever changed. And Ranger, ever watchful, stayed by Mila's side, a guardian, a protector, and a reminder that courage and loyalty, no matter how small or unlikely, could outshine the darkest deception. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light into the courthouse, Mila's mother whispered to her daughter, "The truth is ours now. The shadows have been revealed." Mila smiled faintly, brushing Ranger's fur. "Safe now always?" she asked softly. Ranger's deep, steady bark resonated, a promise that, whatever challenges lay ahead, vigilance, courage, and loyalty would endure. The courtroom saga had reached its climax. The hidden shadows were exposed. Justice had been served, but more importantly, truth, instinct, and courage had triumphed. Yet the echoes of danger, deception, and manipulation lingered, reminders that the world could hide its darkness, but not from those willing to see it, face it, and protect the innocent. And in that moment, with sunlight streaming across polished floors, a toddler's laughter, and a loyal K9 at her side, the impossible had been made real. The story, cinematic, harrowing, and unforgettable, had reached its resolution, at least for now.